November 3rd to vote for the candidate who supported by the Service Employee International Union. To find out information about where to vote from home, please go to vote.seiumn.org.
Nouveau à Minneapolis, Tempo Afrique Travel. Vous voulez voyager? Achetez vos billets d'avion à l'agence de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel. Avec l'agence de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel, pas de problème de connexion, pas de problème de transfert de vol. Avec l'agence de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel, c'est le voyage en toute tranquillité, en toute beauté, de votre maison jusqu'à votre destination. Votre satisfaction est notre plaisir.
Good afternoon, this is Bolo, again coming back to you on Tempo Afrique TV for our monthly show on racial and social justice issues here in America. And I will introduce you my guest today in a bit. And if you see me look at my phone once in a while, that means I am trying to share on my page so that my friends and my guest friends can follow the discussion. And also, I just wanted, as a healthcare professional, I would like to remind you all to continue to wear your mask all the time when you get out of your house or when you're around people, and also practice social distancing and hand washing. Because here in the Midwest, I don't know if everybody is aware that the COVID numbers are rising and hospitals are filling up. We don't have beds in hospitals. So please do your role and to help stop the spreading. Here in the studio, we are following the guidelines. Our guests are sitting 6 feet apart, and also wearing masks when they are not talking. Also, I am a founder of Chelal Africa, an organization that provides medical trips to Africa to help children and women, and to help do the fundraising to fund the organization. I started making these body creams with shea butter from Africa and a lot of other good stuff, essential oils and cocoa butter and coconut oils. So it's very moisturizing and good for the winter. Part of the proceed will be funding the organization. And my guests are lucky, so the 3 of my guests will be going home with each one with one of these.
Right, yeah.
So the title of the show indicates, white mom with adopted black children, and that's it's in the context of interracial or intercultural adoption, and we can have better people to talk about that than the moms themselves. And we have Jessica Guda, and Jessica Perez and Katie Guda with us here, 2 moms who have beautiful black children, 1 son each. And also we have Robert O'Connor, who is assistant professor at Metro State University in social work, and also he's very knowledgeable and also expert in transcultural adoption. He'll tell us more about the details, and each one of them will be introducing themselves one by one to tell us more about who they are. So we're going to start here with Jessica.
Okay.
tell us about yourself and just like what's in your bio.
So my name, as Bola said, is Jessica Peters. I'm from here, and I'm a single parent of 2 boys. I have a 16-year-old
C'est un problème très sérieux.
My 19-year-old we adopted when he was almost 8 months old from Senegal, West Africa.
You can take your mask off when you talk.
Sorry. And I'm so used to having
It's
it on.
okay.
It's been a journey. I lived and worked in Senegal years ago, and that's how I became connected to the Senegalese culture, which eventually led to my adoption of my son. Other than that, I have a master's degree in cultural geography. I've done work in environmental justice, and have always, through educating others, tried to be really involved in racism and racial equity and issues of that sort. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and I'm so happy, to know that your son is from Senegal and you've been to Senegal. And I know on my Facebook, many of my friends were very happy to reconnect with you when I posted the flyer because they knew you in Senegal, and also you guys are like family. They were your host family. And where in Senegal were you?
So initially, I went through a program called MSID through the University of Minnesota, which I believe a guest of yours last month also was through that program.
Yes, Colleen.
Yeah, and so I went over there and I did an internship where I worked on a women's farming project. I was initially in Dakar, but the farming project was in Sebikotan, so a village out from Dakar. And I lived with a family on a local farm, and that's how some of the people on Facebook, that's how I know them. And I became very close to my family. I'm still in touch with them a lot, and I miss them every day.
Yes.
But yeah, the work that I did there was interesting, and the Senegalese culture is just, you can't help but fall in love with it. So,
Aww.
yeah.
And that was Sister Jumindur Wilson, that was your sister in Senegal, who's a friend of mine too.
Yep. We've stayed in touch, and her entire family. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That's wonderful, and I'm glad that you're connected with Senegal.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
Yes.
This is great.
Katie, will come to you. Please introduce yourself and tell us about you.
My name is Katie Gaida. I'm the mother of 2 children. I have my daughter, my biological daughter, who's 12, and then my son, who is 10, and he is adopted from Ethiopia. We live in the metro area. We've lived here for probably 10 years. We actually moved to the metro area to be in a more diverse city than where we were at before. We were in a more rural area, so we chose to move our family to the cities for diversity, and we've been here for 10 years. I am a technical analyst for Prairie Care, so I am currently working from home, and my kids are distance learning from home as well, so we're all very close right now.
That's right. And where did you move from?
It was about 10 years ago. So.
From which city?
We were living in South Dakota before, and we moved to the metro area.
Oh, okay.
About
I missed that.
10 years ago. Yep.
Okay.
When my son was just before actually it was 9 years ago, because he was just before he turned 2, I think. So he was about 1.5 years when we moved. So.
And he was adopted from Ethiopia.
Yep, he was adopted from Ethiopia. He came home at 9 months and has been an amazing addition to our family. So. I'm
so sure, and I'm glad, and I'm sure Minneapolis is like a very nice place for him to be at.
Yes,
culturally.
We're very happy here.
Okay, thank you so much, Katie. We're gonna move on to Mr. Robert O'Connor. Robert, please introduce yourself and tell us about you.
Yeah, certainly. Robert O'Connor, and I am faculty at Metropolitan State University in the social work program, where I've been for about 19 years. I am an adult transracially adopted person, meaning Me and my family, we were one of the first generations of folks transracially adopted in the Midwest here, at least. And so, originally from Milwaukee, and me and my brother left our birth family at about 13 months, my brother about 3 years old, and we had multiple failed adoptions and foster care placements, and ultimately reunited with our birth family when I was in my 20s. And so still maintain those connections of birth sisters and aunties and uncles and grandparents and cousins and church family. So it was a pretty powerful experience. And then I worked went from being a state ward to a state ward administrator. So I went to Minnesota Department of Human Services, adoption and guardianship, and worked there for a number of years. And had the opportunity to kind of be the first person who was a state ward to really do that work. And so kind of took a little bit of a different approach to it, like not separating siblings automatically and all these other features that I think were important about identifying family. And so now I do a lot of speaking and supporting of transracial families and educating on this topic. So.
Yeah, no wonder why you're an expert. You work on it and you have lived experience.
Yeah.
And were you in the same family as your brother?
Yes, we were always in the same home, and I think we were prepared to be separated when we were adopted into our last family. So.
Robert, thank you. That's impressive. We can't wait to hear your opinion and your expertise.
Absolutely.
So yeah, this is a very important topic that doesn't get to be talked about very often, and I know a lot of adopted friends who are having hard time with some part of the experience. They love their families and their moms or dads, but then just the experience of sometimes misunderstanding, like the cultural differences. You raise in a white family and you perceive yourself as white, and your mom and dad may see you just like that too. But then when you get out, you were told the world is telling you differently. And I was also inspired a bit by an article on, I think it's LA Times, and it's about a family in Minnesota, a mom and his son. It's in, I think the city is Otterdale, Minnesota, and where he was the only black person in that city, everyone else is white, and of course his mom didn't see it that way, didn't notice the struggle that he was having inside, and the mom is thinking that she's doing everything she can to help her son and to protect him, but the son inside is having a lot of microaggressions, a lot of prejudices outside that the mom did not see coming, and he's in his 20s, and they were not able to have the opportunity to talk about how each one of them was feeling, or what is experience of each one of them, until George Floyd was murdered, and with the march and the protests, his mom joined to protest, and that's when they were able to open up, and the mom was shocked to hear what he had to say, how much he was struggling inside, and the mom thinking that she's done everything she could, from taking him to Minneapolis, to black churches, to taking him to Atlanta, to museums, and they have the wealthy family having everything, but inside the kid is just was having hard time with things that nobody knew. So that was one of my inspirations, and I just invited all of you to help the world understand what it is like to be an adoptive mom of a child that physically may look different, and also Robert, as a child that was adopted, also what would be your experience, and as an expert, what would be your recommendations. So my first question would be, probably I'll start with Jessica. Can you tell us what inspired you to adopt like interracial, like a child that is apparently different than you, and why Senegal?
For me, it just seemed like a no-brainer. I mean, I'd been to Senegal, I lived there, I had family there, and it just seemed right. When we looked at adoption, at the time that we adopted, I was married, I'm now single, but at the time when we looked at adoption, we immediately went to international adoption, and and when I look back at that process, I can't remember exactly what that decision was, but we were drawn towards international adoption. And for me, it had to be a place that I was already connected to, and someplace where when my son or daughter came home, I would be able to talk to them about their culture and have them involved in their culture more than just by reading about it or watching movies about it or meeting other people. All those things are important. I needed to have a personal connection, and so for me it was there, and I'm lucky because I got to have that experience when I was in college and have returned to Senegal a number of times. So it just made sense for me to go back to Senegal to adopt as opposed to another country that I didn't have any kind of emotional connection to or knowledge of. So
that makes a great sense. And how was the process for you? Was it?
So we did what's called an independent adoption, which means there was no agency involved. There was nobody handed us these sheets of paper telling us what we had to do and what we had to sign. It was really hard. We sort of felt like we were winging it the whole time. And really the only way I think that we were able to have it happen was because I had lived there and I had knowledge of the culture. I had friends and family there who could help us and who knew parts of the system that they could talk to people for us while we were still in the States. And I spoke French, I spoke Wolof, which is one of the local languages. And to be honest, I think that's the only way that it worked. That if someone had just gone in there and said, we want to adopt and all that, I don't think to navigate the system without having the knowledge of the culture and the languages would have been nearly impossible. When we initially got there, the U.S. consulate, the man there said there hadn't been a couple from the U.S. who hadn't adopted there for something like 40 years. So it just hadn't been done. Most adoptions were in country, some were to France, Italy, but not to the U.S. And then when we, upon leaving our last visit to the U.S. consulate, he sort of looked at us silently for a bit, and then he went, "How did you do it?" So it was very difficult. We ran into just the stories that I could tell. I honestly didn't think I would walk out of there with my son. We met him the first day we arrived, and he was given to us even before all of the paperwork was, we had loads to do in the 3 weeks that we were there. So he was mine.
You were bonding already.
Yeah, oh yes, the second I saw him. And he looked at me and I looked at him, and big grins. And it's like, yep, you're mine, I'm yours. And so that was scary in the sense that all the things that could have gone wrong went wrong.
Yeah.
They changed the color of the cover of the passport books while we were there. And in Senegal, that doesn't just mean that they change them and the next day they've got passports. They didn't have the next color so even something like that just kept delaying it and delaying it. There was some law that someone dug up where it said we had to stay in the country for a year when we came to adopt a child. So all of a sudden we were scrambling to stay in the country for a year and do something about our jobs. And then we found out that was not a thing.
No.
So it just, it was hard. And it was really hard, but well worth it.
Yes.
Obviously.
Of course.
Independent adoptions are different.
Yeah, and did you have issues with immigration to bring him?
I mean, that was all
part of the work.
Part of it. Interestingly, our consulate, the U.S. consulate was, I mean, aside from all the strange sort of snafus with the passport and things like that, and just navigating the different, going to the different places in Senegal, and then the electricity would go down, and then you'd have to come back 3 days later, and then, all of those kinds of things. The U.S. consulate was actually the hardest body to work with. They were oddly not very cooperative about the whole thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was difficult, and it was a huge sigh of relief when we stepped on that airplane.
Wow.
Yeah.
And which agency, which adoption, orphanage did you adopt him from?
So it was the one right in Medina, Dakar. Yeah.
Okay.
The
Pépinière, yeah.
du Sur.
Yes. Okay.
Franciscan. So it's run by French nuns.
Yes.
And they have a great program now where the Senegalese caregivers are given a lot of training and job training and all of that. It's a great thing. But it was way too many babies and not enough caregivers.
Yeah.
And it was just so hard to walk away with just Kelvin.
Yes.
And we were going to go back and adopt a second time. And then life changed.
Yes.
And then I was a single parent. They don't adopt to single parents. And as far as I know at this point, they're actually not adopting out of country anymore.
Wow. Yeah. My organization, when we went to a trip 2 years ago, we dropped off donations over there, clothing and diapers, and Aunt Dealers does that too with Project Safety Nets.
Yes.
So if anybody wants to donate kids' baby clothes or formula or diapers, we'll take it to that orphanage and some other ones who really in need.
Yeah, and my kids every year we do a fundraiser for at Art Fest, and we've done it for 10 years, and this year has been a challenge. We're still trying to figure out how to do a video Art Fest, because it used to be people would come into our home, but last year we raised $3,500 for the orphanage, and it's actually Project Safety Nets who takes it over for us.
That's very impressive.
Because they can actually hand it to the director, and so we know the money gets there and it goes for the babies. So yeah, it's great. That's
impressive.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
Yep.
Katie, can you tell us about your adoption and why did you decide to do it from Ethiopia?
We we went kind of the same trajectory where we knew we were adopting. We went into the process just trying to figure out, what was the right fit for us. We ended up going with Ethiopia because we felt like it was a fairly straightforward process. Like, we knew what the paperwork was going to be. We knew we would get a referral. It was fairly cut and dry when we first looked into it. So we decided to go with Ethiopia. Once we learned about the culture, we really tried to immerse ourselves in the culture was, and really tried to make sure we understood what we were doing before we moved forward. But we ended up going through Children's Home Society. We did not do independent. That would be, oh my goodness. So we did have an agency that we worked with, and it was a difficult time at that point with Ethiopian adoptions because policy was changing pretty much monthly. So we went from thinking we were going to have a fairly straightforward process to it was going to be possibly 2 years of waiting. So we weren't quite sure what the process was going to look like. We actually ended up only waiting 9 months. We ended up getting a very surprise call at 9 months. We thought we were going to be waiting 2 years or more, and found out we were matched. And so we kind of just went from it's going to take forever to oh my gosh, she's coming home soon. And even from the time we got the referral to the time we brought him home, they were changing the type of visa he was coming home on. So we had to go from we thought we were only planning a 1 week trip to Ethiopia to we were actually one of the first families for Children's Home that traveled twice. So he came home on a different visa, so that we had to go and actually meet him before we went through the court process, and then we had to go to court, and then we had to come home, and we weren't quite sure how long that time in between was going to be. They told us it would be about 12 weeks, and I had just gotten over my jet lag. I was 4 days out after the trip, and they said Yeah, can you come back in 2 weeks? And I was like, oh, yes, I can.
Oh my goodness.
So we had like nothing ready for him, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh, we have to have everything ready for him. So it was pretty unexpected, it was just a lot, I think, to take in. And then having the 2 trips was, I'm so thankful we did have the 2 trips. Actually, I wish we would have had 3 or 4. We really liked being able to be there and see his culture and see like where he was living and really get to know like where he was coming from. And yeah, he came home. We came home with him. I think our flight out there, we had like a straight flight from Washington, D.C. to Addis. So that was our first trip out there. We were like, this is a really long trip, and I couldn't imagine bringing an infant home on like an 18-hour flight. So the second trip, we actually changed it, so we broke it up. So we stopped in Germany on our way home, which was actually so good because he ended up coming home with like a really bad ear infection. So he was just like screaming so much on the flight home just because his ears were hurting so much. So it was good to have that kind of delay in between, like where we got to like lay low at an airport for 3 hours before getting back on a plane. But yeah, it was an eventful process, I would say. It was difficult at times, but yeah, very, very much worth it.
Wow. Yeah, it's like it is almost much as being pregnant for 9 months and giving birth, right?
So you can drink coffee.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
So yeah, I know, Jessica, we know why you chose to adopt from Senegal. I got a question here from one of the viewers asking why not adopting from here?
At that point, we were more, we had heard a lot of stories about people getting chosen like domestically and then having the birth parents rightfully change their minds. You know, you want them to make sure that they're making the right choice. And I think at that point I was so nervous and scared that the idea of having like a straightforward process was a lot more appealing to me. You know, now I don't think that would scare me as much to do a domestic adoption. Like, I think just at that point where I was at in my life, it was just a little scarier. Where now I would be much more open to it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
It's very impressive, and you know, we can. It's amazing how you find your son across the ocean and continents, and you just see each other, and you know you belong to each other.
Yep.
And I'm glad he's with you.
Yes.
And Robert, you as an expert, what do you have to add? I know can you tell us like what countries are easier to adopt from and what is the right process? Because I know there were some issues in some of the African countries where they will tell parents, we are getting your child a scholarship or something or sponsor to go get education to the US when actually they're selling them for adoption. They're getting money and taking them to be adopted. And there was a story where one kid, the family was so kind enough, like thinking they're adopting the kid, but then they realized it wasn't really adoption. The mom and the dad thought their kids were just visiting the US for a while, but then they ended up taking the kid back. So what do you think about it? And then what is the difference between adopting overseas and adopting here in the US?
Yeah, you know, I'm not particular on the details of each country. I do know that international adoption is declining considerably across the country, and that many more countries are trying to find resources within their own countries to be able to try to support kids and families that are in need of permanency or homes. And yeah, part of that is when you have vulnerable, populations, then sometimes what happens is that black market creeps in there, and so that there has been a number of countries were including here in the U.S. back when we had orphanages, or kids who weren't real orphans. They were from the countryside, and there was poverty-related issues, and so South Korea, a number of countries where people would go to visit their child, and their child was gone, and so some of those kinds of things in the black market piece resulted in changes, substantial changes, and kind of I think also for women to be able to, the lessening stigma in their home countries, to be able to keep a child who may have been born to them out of wedlock. And adult adoptees have been going back to their countries of origin and trying to make change for families and mothers. So trying to reduce that stigma. And what was your second question about?
Like the adopting here as opposed to overseas.
So we kind of have a private system. So for private adoption agencies like a Children's Home Society, whom I'm on the board for, and then adopting kids from the foster care system. And actually I'm somebody who was in both foster care system and the private adoption system. But when we have many kids throughout the nation, approximately 900,000, between 500 and 900,000 any given time, children throughout the country who are in foster care, who are legally free, meaning their parental rights have been terminated, and they're looking for families. And so those parents or prospective parents go through a training process, education process, a home study process, and a Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, a background checks, and then they're able to adopt those children. And so the majority of adoptions of kids who come out of foster care are foster parents who end up adopting the kids in their care. And so that's preferential to maintain those contacts and those relationships. I think what's most preferential is when, if they go into foster care, that they're able to go back to relatives, someone within the family system, to be able to adopt. And so I think that's a major system. A major difference is also that it tends to be free to adopt kids from the foster care system, versus in the private adoption system, it tends to be anywhere from $15,000 to $35,000 to $45,000. Plus the time restrictions and the travel, and so that can be, if it's international, that can be very challenging. And then children who are relinquished by the birth moms here through open adoptions, meaning the birth parent will have some type of connection still to the child that they relinquished, their children. Those can be very spendy as well, and the birth mother or fathers get to choose who the adoptive parent is. And so that selection process can take a while, and so that can be, that's one of the other major differences. But yeah, some parents find they're more comfortable with adopting overseas, and so they can kind of, address some of those, some of the fears that sometimes are baked into the process. But now the majority, 90% plus, are open adoptions, and we find that it's the best thing for kids, so that they don't have a bunch of blanks or secrets in their past, that they can kind of know who they are and know where they've come from. That's something that we all need and all need to know about. So
yeah, even in health wise, it's good to know the genetic. If somebody is sick or something and predispositioned and stuff. Maybe even for that matter, it's good to know what if my mother or father had heart attack, or they had some genetic disease that may affect the child. Thank you so much for your input, Robert. And for our listeners on Facebook, if you have any questions, please send them our way. And also there's a phone number listed there. If you want to call, you're very welcome to do that also. My next question would be, it could be all of you, Robert, you were adopted too. So when did your children started noticing that they may be different, like in appearance, than you guys, and how did you help them adjust to that, and how did you help them form an identity? And Robert, you'll answer how that affected you too as a child.
Certainly.
Jessica?
Well, for my son Calvin, he came home at about 8 months old, and I don't know if I could tell you the exact moment or when he started noticing, because it's something that we were always talking about and normalizing, in the sense that we would always talk about skin color and in his skin color in very positive ways. And so it's not like it was just the sudden aha moment. And we had always tried to, surround him with images of Senegalese people, black people, books, that sort of thing. And we were always talking about race. And so, there were certainly moments that I remember when he would maybe say something about noticing. I remember we went to a Senegalese event. I don't remember how old he was. Maybe.
He was tiny. I remember meeting him.
He was tiny.
He was like 5 or 6, I don't know.
Yeah, and we walked in, and he looked around, and he just kind of stared and said, oh, Mama, they're all brown like me. And then he turned to me and he said, and you're the only kind of light tan person here. So we had always been talking about skin tone and so that awareness, I think, was, certainly there were moments when it became more apparent to him, but I don't know that I noticed like the moment when that consciousness came to him. But yeah, that identity was always, always wanted him to be very proud of his skin color, very proud of his heritage, and just always trying to work that in a very natural, kind of normal way.
Yes.
And it should be from the beginning.
Yes.
For sure. Even if you think they're too little to perceive it, to understand it, they do. I can't remember what it is, what age children actually developmentally recognize difference in skin tone, and then there's another age where they actually become aware that the culture has created categories for people of different skin colors. So so that's how it was with us.
That's very good. You kind of like exposed him at a young age, and taking him around people that he looks on the outside and think, oh, they look like me, and also he's aware that, oh yeah, look at mommy, now you're the one who looks different.
Yeah.
So he's the one who's experienced being different in appearance, but then when you took him to the Senegalese party, he sees now
like,
you're
hey,
the one
Mom,
who's the
you're
minority.
One here.
Yes.
Yeah. And
that's
it's like, yes, yeah.
That's great. That's great. And I know that I discussed with some friends who had friends or relatives who were adopted, but their parents did not want to do that. They think they want to be colorblind and just making their kids blind and think. But those kids, some of them ended up having depression and having issues with their identity and a lot of issues. So I think you're doing the right thing. I would want to know what your son says, but how it affected him. But I think it's a great thing to do.
Right, and you really can't go into this if you're adopting culturally, transracially. You can't colorblind approach. Well, the colorblind approach doesn't work for
anything.
Nobody, even if you're a completely Caucasian family, doesn't work.
Yeah.
You will parent in a way where it's talking about skin color, talking about race. It is what you talk about. It's a part of your daily life, and you have to be very intentional about it. I grew up in a white suburb, and my family never talked about race. That wasn't a part of my upbringing, and so it changes how you parent, and it's very intentional. Anywhere from just having everything you can in the home that looks back at him with his image. So the books, the art, those, I don't know if those wonderful skin tone crayons, and that's where we discovered there really wasn't one that matched Mama's skin, because nobody's really white, right? So. And just always having those conversations around it, and looking at the characters in the book, and looking at the people around us and our friends, and surrounding him with faces he can relate to.
Yeah, and you're right. Like the noticing of the difference is not just in adopted kids, even kids in black families. Like my daughter, when she was 5, that's when she was describing her friends to me, saying they're peach.
Yeah.
You know, like her white friends will go like, she's peach, she's very beautiful, she's peach, and they're aware of the color difference, and it's okay to talk about it, and it's okay to let them know that everybody's color is different, but they're all unique and beautiful. Yeah, Katie?
I would kind of say the same, along the same lines, where I don't remember a specific time where Leo, like, all of a sudden, like, noticed it. I do remember when he was younger, he loved looking in mirrors, and he'd always, like, look at himself, like, touch his own reflection in the mirror, and then he'd touch mine, and he'd be like, what is this? Like, kind of go back and forth. But yeah, we talked a lot about it. We had all of the books. Like, that's my parenting go-to, is buy a book. Like, anytime they come at me with a question, I'm like, there's got to be a book for this. And then I'll go and buy it. And so we have, like, tons of books on skin color, and we talked he had all of those books, and we read them daily and talked about it. I do remember, like, he was probably like 3 or 4, being in a department store, and he just was like, we saw a man that was working at the department store, and all of a sudden he was just like, he is brown like I am, like, just like completely amazed. And like, so like, I remember there's moments of where he made comments like that, but I don't think there was like an overall like revelation one day that, because it was just our topic of conversation on a daily basis. So, he knew who he was and where he was from, and he knew the way we looked and where we were from, and our story too, and we just kind of wove it in. That was our family story, and we always talked about it. So,
have you been to places or events where you have more of the black people to have him see
we
around?
try to go to as many Ethiopian cultural events as we can find, which lovely is in the Twin Cities are all over the place. So we always are able to find something. So we do try to go to as many events as we can and explore. And whenever he has questions or concerns or wants to talk about it, we are very open to talking about it and learning about it and reaching out for different resources. Yeah,
I know. One of the doctor friend that I work with has 2 adopted daughters from Ethiopia, and she moved them from Montana to here in Minneapolis, where now they go to Ethiopian restaurants, they're braiding their hair, they're going to churches that are mixed, predominantly black. So it's very important, and it's a sacrifice for the mom to understand, I want to help my kids form their identity and feel fitting in. I think that's great.
And I think it's a common theme in everyone, where you're always trying to find your identity. And as a mom, like, my identity changed when I became Leo's mom, and so I was trying to change my identity as well, and trying to learn more about it, and trying to teach him as well, so that he could change his identity as well, and just be comfortable in who he is, and I wanted to be comfortable in who I was as his mother. So I think it's huge to embrace that culture and embrace who he is, and teach him everything that he wants to know.
So in the process of helping him form his identity, you had to change your identity to adjust.
Oh yeah.
That's a very interesting point. And how did you change your identity, like, as opposed to what you were before, growing up in a white community without a black kid, and now?
I would say growing up where we were at, I probably didn't really I didn't think about racism on a daily basis. I didn't think about social justice issues on a daily basis. I was very wrapped up in my privilege, and like very aware of, or not aware of, that I even had privilege, and so I just kind of like didn't think about it. And I think when we brought him home and we lived in rural areas, and started hearing people's comments about his hair and wanting to touch his hair and like wanting to do, and I was just like, I don't like this, like, and starting to read more about it and learning, just learning and changing what I knew, and what little I knew, I didn't know anything, honestly, and learning more and being open to learning more and being open to learning like where I was at and learning to change and accept that, you know, what I've known is not exactly right, and being able to change that all the time. And I still do. I still am learning like daily, where I'm like, wait a minute, why did I think that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm constantly challenging. As a family, we're constantly challenging ourselves and how we think and trying to improve upon ourselves.
Yeah, and that's a mom thing, you know. In general, we are always trying to see how we can help our kids form their identities and things like that, and also, you know, the fears that you have and all of that. That's kind of like what you guys have in common with Black moms who have Black kids, also specifically living in white communities predominantly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Robert, how about you? Tell us about your childhood, when you started noticing the difference, and how did that affect your identity?
Yeah, well, I know that having my brother, who was 2 years older than myself, with me in all the different moves, it was important that I had him to be able to look at, and so it was pretty clear that we were different from all the placements that we were in, because they were all Caucasian placements. And so I would say, you know, one of our final adoptive placement was into a rural community, to a Caucasian family that lived on a farm, where we were the only African Americans in the town. And so it was very clear, you know, kids would point, you know, and parents would do this, and so we didn't know what it was, but we just knew that wherever we went, you know, people were always, you know, making a sound or a question, etc. And so going to kindergarten, that was, you know, I was the first Black kid that any of the kids had ever met, and differential treatment, you know, nobody wanted to play with us, and teachers were kind of like ignored it, and so it was pretty clear right away, including having relatives who sometimes didn't want to meet us, or who, you know, treated us differently, with gift giving, or, you know, my sister's picture on the wall but not ours, and, you know, those kinds of challenges that it was pretty explicit. And so we just kind of, my mom moved us to probably inner city St. Paul when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and that made a big difference, because then I just fit in with everybody else. And then about 3rd grade, moved out to Little Canada, a small community where I was the only Black kid in the entire town. And
Little Canada here?
Yeah, Little
Okay.
Canada, Minnesota.
Okay.
And my brother at that time, my parents got divorced. My brother stayed with my mom, and I went to live with my dad. And so I was without my brother, and then it was really apparent that I was like, whoa, the only Black kid. And so I got teased, and automatically was put into special ed, like the 3rd or 4th class, and was just remained in special ed for a long time, until a teacher was like, you know, what are you doing in this class? I'm like, oh, that's where they told me to come, behind the building, you know, in the annex here. And they're like, yeah, you shouldn't stay in special ed. I was like, okay. And so I just realized that I wasn't taught, you know, at a level commensurate with my abilities. So there was one major thing, I think, that happened.
What age was that? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that was probably 10th grade.
Wow.
So from 3rd grade to 10th grade, I was in versions of, or portions of special ed. Some schools didn't have special ed, so I was just in a lower reading group, etc. But realized when I came into contact with other African Americans that I was uncomfortable around other African Americans. And a guy said, hey, what's up? And I was like, I don't know, because I didn't know what he was talking about. And he thought I was teasing or being disrespectful, and he's like, no, what's up? And I was like, this
The
guy?
language, you mean the language?
Inflation?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had no clue, and I had no language, no context to be able to relate to him or understand.
Yeah, yeah.
So I remember that was really a big crack in my assimilationist armor that said I was going to be just like the other 560 graduates of my Mounds View High School class. And I knew I wanted to be different, but I didn't know how to get that culture. I didn't know how to address that anxiety that was within me in addressing people who look like me. And there was a vulnerability about it as well, because I always felt like people could look at me and see, you know, that there was something different about me. And so that's what they did. They'd look at me like,
That's the black people.
Yeah, the black folk
Yeah.
would look at me like,
Yeah.
what's wrong with him, you know? Whether it was my socks up to my knees, you know, or my hair that was all messed up or whatever it was. There was something about me. And then, of course, I looked at them and I could tell there was something completely different, you know. They had a little extra pep in their step, or I didn't know the language or the
Yeah.
handshakes. And so I just really had a degree of isolation that I didn't know what to do with
From both sides.
from both sides.
Because you didn't fit in the white community, but then the black community didn't see you as black because of the culture that
Yes.
you. Actually, you're right. Like Robert is a good friend of my husband. They're like actually brothers. They have
Yes.
a group of friends of them that get together once a week at least to eat together and just give each other pet talks and stuff. So my husband was also, he was unadopted, but he grew up in a suburb where he was only black, him and his brother and sister. And when he went to Atlanta for black college, they were doing the same thing to him. When he talks in class, they'll tell him, something like, why are you talking like that? Something like, you're too white. So he didn't fit either. So, you know, the cultural exposure is very important regardless, and in terms of the kids forming their self-esteem and identity. And you two are doing a great job in helping your kids at a young age to at least overcome that challenge that Robert had. Thank you so much. It was very enlightening, these participations from you guys. So our next question would be, when did ever your sons experience racism, and how did you face that? How did you help, and how did that affect both of you?
We could talk about that for hours. I think my son's 19 now, and the racism was throughout, and it came in all different forms. And so when he was really little, and you know, we'd be out in the community, it would come in sort of these odd ways where I don't know what it is, but somehow his skin color made it okay for other people to cross the line of into kind of our private lives. I'm sure you've found that as well. And so there'd be those questions of, you know, are you his real mom? Is he really your own? Do you do foster care? And when you think about turning around to some stranger in the grocery line, you'd never ask those questions.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my first experience. The touching of the hair, that would happen all the time. And it's interesting, so my reaction to different scenarios, it's changed over time, and it is situational. And so in the beginning, I was definitely the mama bear. I would get angry and have kind of a visceral reaction to it. And a lot of my comebacks were rather sarcastic or angry. Or my favorite was sort of to turn it back and say, why do you ask? And that would make people pause and think about why they asked that question and what it was really about. But then as he grew up, and you know, when you are in these situations, you realize your child is watching and learning. And so when he was, I don't know, 5 or 6, I can remember an instance, a hair instance, where we were coming out of a community event, and it was a predominantly Caucasian people there, and a man approached him, hand outstretched, and said, "Oh, you have the most beautiful hair. May I touch it? May I touch it?" And he wasn't really asking permission. He already was walking towards him with his hand outstretched. And of course, my visceral response was to move towards him and say, "You can touch his hair if I can rub my hand all over your bald spot." You know, I mean, it was just right. But of course, I'm just thinking that. And instead, I thought for a minute, okay, I can use this to help empower my son. So I turned to Calvin and I said, you know, it is your choice who touches your hair and who touches your body, and you can say no. Now, he's still just 5, and he was not an incredibly assertive child anyway. So of course he's kind of
Yeah.
like deer in the headlights. And this man, I'm thinking also in that moment, this man's going to get it by me saying that. Not at all. So in that case, I did have to step in and go, yeah, I'm not comfortable with this, and I don't think he is either. So there were incidences like that all the time. But then you get to ones that are even more blatant and scarier. And I can think of maybe he was 10-ish, and we were at a state park on a trail, at a trailhead, quite remote. We'd had to drive way down, and it was a few hours out of town. And we'd just come back from a hike, and we were parked at the trailhead, and there was one other vehicle. We were walking to our car, and another kid approached us, a little bit older, maybe 12-ish, and started just chatting, and it was all fine. And there were two other adults with him. They were all Caucasian. And the kid was just chatting, and then all of a sudden he started saying, and you know what we do too, and then he used the N-word, and he starts doing these,
Wow.
you know, violent gestures,
Wow.
and spewing the N-word back and forth. And Calvin's just shocked, and the two adults with him could hear what was going on, but were sort of chuckling, so clearly had no problem with what their child was saying to mine. And so of course there's that initial visceral response where I want to tell those adults, you know, give them a piece of my mind and all that. And yet there we are at a trailhead in rural Minnesota where nobody's going to hear us for miles around. And that's the moment where you go, get into the car, kids.
Yes.
Don't say anything, just get into the car.
Yeah.
You know, because those men were twice my size, and
How old was he?
probably 10-ish.
Wow.
And the hard part for me, and as he's gotten older and we've had other incidents, other racist incidents, whether it was when I'm present or not, is now it's about, like, you want him to have a sense of dignity and a sense of empowerment, and you want him to feel like he has a voice, and you want him to come home.
Right.
And for me, that's the hardest piece. Because how do you teach that racism is so wrong? And I'm sorry, but in most cases, you just have to go along with it so that you don't get killed. And he's 19 now, and that's even more true. And
Yeah.
and that's what I struggle with the most, is how do you help him keep that sense of self-respect, and that he does have that empowerment.
Yeah.
And yet, if he gets pulled over by the cops, he will have to do everything they say, no matter how absurd it is,
Yeah.
just to make sure, and then we'll
make
deal
home.
with it later.
Yeah.
You know, but just come home.
Yes.
And that to me is a struggle.
Yes. And I think there is a short movie that's went viral, Come Home, like black parents with their kids. It's called Come Home. I can't remember the exact title, but it's very powerful. And that's exactly where you have a lot in common with black moms or black parents, just
Right.
praying for their kids to come home and trying to tell them, just swallow your pride and do whatever you ask to do. I just want you to come home.
Yeah, and that's been hard for Calvin to understand, because it is wrong.
Yeah.
And in his mind, he's kind of a very right and wrong, concrete thinker. And so it's like, yeah, it's wrong, and you have to manage the situation and adapt to it the way that our culture has constructed race and made it this way, and made it so that it's dangerous for you to
Yes.
speak
Yes.
your piece and to say what should be said in that moment, and you can't.
Yes.
Yeah.
And your experience, there are so many black parents who had the same experience in rural areas. And I think I would even say what made it easy for you guys is because you're a white mom, and maybe that can cause like retaining them a little bit, but so many black parents have those issues in those little tiny places where they don't have anybody to help.
Yeah.
Once again, same experience. That's why we have this show, to show that everybody with a black child is feeling the same.
And I'm sure, Katie, you
And
probably...
Katie, we're gonna move next to you. The same question.
Yeah, my son is younger, so we haven't had any like really overt overt occasions. I even talked to him about it because I saw the questions, and I was like, Leo, have you ever experienced racism? And he was like, no. I'm like, I would say more like we've, and I've experienced them with him, is more like the microaggressions, like just like the touching of the hair, or like talking about his skin and wanting to, like, treating him like an exotic pet, or like that, like those times. I do remember, like, when we were little and we'd go to the playground, moms would kind of like keep their kids away from him until they realized that he had a white mom, and then they'd be like, oh, like, think he was like this great, amazing kid, and I'm just like, no, he was great and amazing before. Your kid still could have played with him. So I mean, there's moments like that where, like, are pretty vivid in my memory, and like people, feeling like they're just like completely invited into our family story, like. Oh, is he adopted? Where is he adopted from? Why did you adopt? Like, and like you said, like in the grocery store, and you're like, I'm just trying to get milk right now. I don't want to tell, like, everything, and I don't have to. And I think I would say for me, like, I've actually changed the way I'm a fairly, like, laid back parent. Like, I'm pretty much like, you learn and you react, and okay, you're gonna become you. But with him, what I've become so afraid of sending him out into society that I'm actually really, really strict with him on, like, saying yes ma'am, no ma'am, like showing respect. And we actually had that talk after George Floyd was murdered, and I said, this is why I'm always wanting you to say yes sir, yes ma'am, like, I want you to make sure, because he is my son, and he is super sarcastic, and he's really good with one-liners and really good at coming back with people, and I'm like, but he's not really good at knowing his audience either. So I'm just like, he could think he was talking to me, and he's talking to a cop, and he's 16 and he's driving, and I have those, like, fears in me. And I told him, and I've explained that to him, I'm like, it's become a joke in my family, because they're always like, well, Katie's kids are always going to say yes ma'am, no ma'am. I'm just like, yes they are, I'm sorry. Like, that's not really where I was at before I parented him. But bringing him home and seeing him grow up, those are the things that I think about, and sending him off into the community. And then with George Floyd, like, that is our community, and I'm like, he is going to be 16 driving in Minneapolis. Like, he could get pulled over. He is most likely going to get pulled over. How do I want him to react? And talking to him about that, and trying to, explain that, like, you just go along with it until you can get out safe, because I want you home safe. And those are conversations that I don't think I ever thought about before him. So I feel like I'm still in that learning stage, I'm still trying to figure out how to respond to things and how to teach him about things, but we're, I guess, doing it together and learning along the way. So
that reminds me of my my last show. One of the guests, who's a white mom, her son's dad is from Senegal, and she's kind of like a straightforward person too, and she didn't realize at the early on that she was teaching her son the way she thinks as a white person. So it's like, when Cap says something, you can say something back. And the son learned it the hard way, and she realized, oh, wait a minute, he can't just say that way. And I'm glad you're preparing your son. And it's unfortunate, it's sad that some people can say things and get away with, and some people can't, and that's why we're here to talk about it, because it's because of racism and segregation. So, Robert, did you have any can you tell us about your first experience in racism, and how did your parents react? I know you were having all the microaggressions. But
well, I think, just even, like I said, as a kindergartner all the way through, I think my mom at some point began to intercept some of the gifts, or some of the Christmas cards that had $5 in it just for their birth daughter, my sister Sarah. And so she would intercept those and add 2 more $5 bills for my brother and myself, and say, oh, look what came for all 3 of you.
Aww.
And so that she would know how to do that, and so that we wouldn't feel that. And then also just kind of putting some family members or other people at a kind of a secondary tier of influence, so they wouldn't have access to us to say those comments. So they wouldn't be at our houses for holidays, and we wouldn't go to their houses for holidays. But we did still have to travel to go to family events, and I remember, I think I was probably about 6 or 7, being in North Dakota at a family wedding in Fargo, and my dad sent us out to the car to get something, and we didn't come back. And so he came looking for us, and some drunk guy had us up against the car, and like, what are you doing here? And so that really just was like, from a young age, like, people will pay attention to your color and treat you differently. And I remember being run off the road when I was riding my bike in a pickup truck, running me off the road and yelling stuff at me. This is White Bear Lake, not Black Bear Lake, and just picking myself up and getting back on my bike and going to my all-white school and pretending like it didn't happen. So those are just from young age to being in college, going to places where I was physically assaulted just because of how I looked with my white friends. Whether it was going to the Hog's Breath Bar in St. Paul and somebody just, deciding to punch me in my back and having to wake up my friends and they had to surround me to get me out of there. Or whether it's the cabin up near Crosby, Minnesota, where the Confederate flags and other people are, it's something that I've always had to be aware of. It has not been a privilege of mine to not ignore the skin color that I'm in. And so, yeah, the talk, it's made it into our elections now with respect to, the reality of navigating race in this society. And so I have that conversation with my kids. I have 4 kids, 6 to 21, 3 boys. And so my parents have sat on panels and we've had these discussions, and it's a real thing. And I've been pulled over by the police a number of times, including eating in a restaurant and having the police to shine their flashlight in my face while I'm eating, and laughing about it and just, joking about racial profiling. So these are just, I've had police pull their gun on me before, and just as a teenager, 16, not knowing, when they look for one of my ID and reach for my duffel bag, and I didn't know those things because I wasn't taught about driving while black or what that meant. So I had to learn the hard way, and luckily, parents, they're teaching their kids and they're attending to those things now, and that's a message that my parents and I have been kind of trying to share for a long time.
Wow.
Yeah.
You've been through a lot, and I'm glad you're here, and you're making a big difference in this world.
Amen. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you so much. It's just really disturbing and sad stories, and let's move on to the next question. The next question would be, you guys talked about discussing racism and all of that. So, and also on your discussions, I think you kind of touch how adopting black kids change your perspective of the systemic racism. If you can touch on that, like, quickly, how did you feel about existence of systemic racism before adopting your child, and how did that change now after adopting?
So for me, I became really involved in environmental justice issues and that sort of thing in college, and through activism and all of that. Also, as I taught at a community college, I taught cultural geography and anthropology. So I was always I taught a lot about race and how race is a social construct, and being that it was geography, the spatial impacts of race, redlining, gerrymandering, all of that. So I was aware of it and involved on an academic level, certainly passionate about those issues, and certainly would become emotional when you'd hear about, like, police brutality and all of that. But when it's your own, it's completely different. And so, yes, prior to adopting Calvin, I would maybe see something on the news, police brutality of a black person, and it would enrage me, and it would make me really sad for the family and for the person. And now when I see it, I see my son. So it's personal now. And just like Haiti, I've as time has gone on, I've educated myself more and more, and just seeing it, all of the racist acts, whether they're microaggressions or something even more overt, they happen all the time to Calvin, and they will happen more as he goes out into the world. So you can't not be more aware of systemic racism when you adopt transracially. It's just it's your family.
Yes.
And all the things that I learned about and taught about as an academic and whatnot, now
it's personal.
It's personal, and now I have to worry about that for my son and for his future and his opportunities, and like we talked about, whether or not he'll even just come home safely. So it's completely different.
Thank you, Jessica. How about you, Katie?
It's changed completely once it becomes your son. You know, it was a lot more education, a lot more reading, learning more about what it actually is. Like, you hear systemic racism all the time, but you don't know, like, you don't, if you don't know, you don't know. You don't know what it actually is, and then you start looking at it and you're like, well, this is how our country was built. It was built for white people, and that is my, learning about privilege and learning about just everything. And I think it wasn't until Leo was ours that we really dove into the education piece and understanding what it is. And I would say, even family members, like when my kids were little, thought we were thinking too much about it and reading too much into it, and and now where we're at politically, where our world is at, they're we have a lot more people understanding what the issue actually is. We have a lot of my mom is deathly worried about my son now, because she's just yes, you do live in Minneapolis, and she loves her grandson more than anything, and she's just I don't want my grandson to lose my grandson. And and I think in the beginning she wasn't thinking so much about that, where now it's just understanding and learning, and everyone's kind of coming out of I'm coming out of this privileged haze of which I started when he came home, and and now it's just become more and more. So
yeah, it's never too late. And also you're right, it's the systemic racism is so invisible because it's part of the fabric of the country. You can't see it unless if you are affected personally. It's hard, some other people may sympathize and try to help, and which is great, because without the great white allies, we are not going to go anywhere. But the ones that are really living it, you have a child or you are black, that's when you really get it, and that's when you can see it, because you're living it every day in one way or the other, and that's what we have in common. And Robert, do you have anything to add?
I think just I remember taking a trip from here and driving down to New Orleans with a college friend of mine, and after I got back, my mom had said, I think I was 21, 22. She said, I was afraid that, that I knew that I had taught you to really have pride in who you were and that you had a voice, and I was afraid that you would stand up for yourself at the wrong time. And she said, I was afraid that I had set you up. And indeed, there were situations just traveling where in Georgia or Mississippi, a gas attendant refused to give me back my change. And so I stood there, and people started noticing, and was like, are you okay, lady? And I'm like, I need my change, And so I did, and and so there were those situations where we have individual responses, and then we have responses to systemic issues, whether it's calling the store owner, or going in and writing a letter, or going to the corporate. And so those are, when we see our parents doing those things, our kids are indeed watching us and learning what tools to be able to put in our tool belt to respond, not in the same way every single time, but how to navigate that nuanced kind of deal. And safety is kind of the first thing that I try to teach folks. Be aware of your surroundings when you respond. Educability of the person. Are you going to be able to educate that person, that drunk person right there? No, you're not.
No, never.
Or Aunt Sue, who's just never going to change. Okay, so then you have to do something different. Remove your child from Aunt Sue. And so, but I think you guys are attending, and I think playing ostrich, so many folks can afford to just kind of stick their head in the sand. It's part of white privilege. And I've met thousands of transracial adopted parents across the country over the years. I've been having these conversations for literally 40 years, and been part of studies, etc. And the reality is, a lot has changed and a lot has not changed. We still have a lot of parents who just believe that not talking about race is the best way to deal with it. And the colorblind approach, at least a third of my audience usually still ascribes to that. And so we still have a long way to go. I think the heightened attention to that now, I think we do have more people who are like, kind of becoming more conscious to it. But we need more people to actually act and take a stand and realize that, injustice anywhere, like Martin Luther King said, is an injustice to all of us, and we have to all see that. So.
Yes. Yeah, that's true, and that's just not it shouldn't even just be limited to the adopted families. It's every family.
Yeah.
No, colors are here, and the problem is, like I was listening to this podcast. The problem is running away from talking about race or talking about color is what got us where we are. I mean, God created us all different in appearance. We all have the same hearts. We find great people everywhere, and people who are more alike as black and white than two white people or two black people. So it's good to talk about race. It's good to talk about differences. That's how we learn. That's how we accept each other. I started talking to my kids about it. We are black people, like your white friends or Asian friends. Same thing to white people. If you say, "Oh, we don't see colors," your kid is going to go outside and say something offensive to their friends, and you didn't prepare them. So you guys are all right. And we have a couple quick questions before we end the time. It's a great conversation, and I don't want it to end, but we have to end it at some point. But my next question is, I have friends also who are adopted and who really wanted to reconnect with their birth parents, and the birth parents didn't want to acknowledge them, and some still looking, some even hire people to help them find their birth parents. I think they have that sense of missing piece of their puzzle, not because they don't love their adopted parents, but just like there's just always something missing. And I was watching a show, it's in French, from France, and that lady was like, she's 43 or 44, and she's crying, trying to find a piece of her because she has no connection with anybody, and she's just feeling her whole life something is missing, even though her mom loves her. She just wanted to see that and have a closure, and also know why her mom gave her up. And some people give up because they willingly, some because one of the other shows I watch is because they didn't have means to raise their child. So you as adoptive parents, if your child wanted to reconnect with their birth parents, or have you talked about that, and how would you react to that?
So in our situation, unfortunately, and I don't want to get into too much detail because it's Calvin's privacy, his private story, but there will never be an opportunity for him to connect with his birth family. We don't have any information about them, and it is impossible to ever find out information. We still talk about them, and we talk about what he thinks they are like, and and remind him that he was brought to the orphanage out of love, and that his birth family wanted what they thought was the best for him. So I think it's still important that he has some kind of a connection, even though he'll never have that connection of actually meeting his birth family. And I think from what I've heard from other adoptive families, different kids have different reactions to that, to either being pulled towards really wanting to reconnect, and some who actually reject that idea completely. And so I think just being open about it, and if that was an opportunity, I would jump on it.
Yeah.
Because I would love to just be able to tell his birth mother, Calvin's okay.
Yes.
You know, he's okay.
Yeah.
When you brought him to the orphanage, he has a family and he is loved and he's an amazing human being.
Yeah.
And if I could just give her that
Yeah.
and give her that to hold,
Yeah.
I would do that in a heartbeat.
And I'm sure each one of you will say thank you to the other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for giving birth to him, and thank you for giving him
Yeah.
life.
And I'm always highly aware that that's a piece that he will always be missing. He will never be able to find out, let alone the health history that's really important, but just knowing where he came from and that story and what were the circumstances, who is my family, who is my birth family. He'll never get that, and that will always be a missing piece for him.
Yeah.
And it makes me
And
sad.
I'm glad he has Senegal.
Yes, and that's the powerful.
Yeah.
That's the piece. There's nothing more powerful. We have a friend Adama.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he has a ceramic studio here.
Yeah.
And we met with him early on, and I tried to do a lot for Calvin and help him with his identity. But there was nothing more powerful when the first time Calvin's gotten to do a lot of pottery with Adama.
Yeah.
Walked him through the studio, introduced him to the other potters there, and proudly said, "This is Calvin Kader. He is Senegalese like me."
Yeah.
And it's different than Mama saying he is Senegalese than when you have a Senegalese man saying proudly he's Senegalese like me.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
huge.
That's
very
great.
huge.
I'm so glad. How about you, Katie?
We actually met part of his birth family when we were in Ethiopia. I think it was the second trip. So we do have pictures of us with some of his birth
nice.
family, and then we actually have worked with a searcher and found his whole birth story, and we do send letters back and forth between birth family members about, we try to do once a year, if not more, and I really go off of what Leo wants in that. So if he really wants to write a letter to his family, that's when we write a letter, and he kind of dictates what he wants to ask, and then they respond back, and we send pictures and they send pictures. So we do have a lot of that. He is a very articulate child. He has always been just a super, he's very good at describing his feelings and saying what he thinks, and it's amazing. And from the time he was 2 years old, he talked about his birth family and wanting to know, just wanting to know more. So we always had that kind of we need to, if we can, we need to find this information out for him. So we do have that there, and I'm just so thankful. I mean, he tells everyone that he has 2 moms, and people are always
great.
but that's your husband.
Yeah.
He does have 2 moms. And he is very well aware of what his story is, and and he knows that we always will continue to answer those questions and be open about it, and there's no shame in asking. And we hope to make a trip back to Ethiopia sometime and meet his family, but obviously not going to happen in the next year.
Yeah.
But
Well, I'm so glad you gave him that opportunity, and I'm sure he appreciates that. And
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
The other piece that I've heard to mention too is, I was lucky enough, as I said, to have lived in Senegal and have my family there. And so for Calvin, his middle name is Kader, and he's named after one of my family members, Kader Cissé. And really in Senegal, he is family.
yes,
So even though he was not,
it may not be
biologically
blood,
related,
but it's family. Yeah.
he's family. And so he has always grown up with the notion that that is your Senegalese family. You have family in Senegal.
Yep.
And I think that's been a really important.
And he's going to be poured with love and hospitality too anytime he goes there.
Oh,
so.
yes. Anytime we go back to Senegal, we know we have a place
You're
to
welcome.
stay and amazing food to eat. And
Yeah.
yes, teranga and all of that. Yeah.
So, Robert, tell us how was it the process or you meeting your both parents? Was it hard to your mom?
It was something that I always wanted to do, even when I was younger, and I didn't know that's what I was expressing. It was kind of coming out in ways that I wasn't necessarily aware of. Like the whole ambiguous loss, that's the most difficult kind of loss to deal with, is when you don't know, when there's no resolution to it. And so when I was young, I thought about it a little bit, but a lot of adopted folks have loyalty issues, meaning that they caretake the emotional needs of their adoptive parents. And so they're like, I would never search because I don't want to offend my parents. And so we try to change that dialogue and say, hey, these are what the kids' needs should, drive this and manage this. So for myself, my parents always said, yes, you know what, if you're interested in searching, absolutely, we'll help you. And so I think I did when I was about 20, but it was something where I actually worked in an adoption agency. And I remember walking down the hallway, and they used to keep all of our records in a file cabinet, like a Dewey Decimal System, O for O'Connor. And I'd walk down the hallway and I'd see that, just all my information sitting right there in the file cabinet, yet it was illegal for me to access it. But any intern, volunteer, support staff, anybody could access that. It meant nothing to them. So my brother, he didn't want to do a search. He was afraid of kind of like a second rejection, because oftentimes that feels like rejection to adoptive folks when they're relinquished, even if it's in love. But for me, making that connection, it was really powerful, and we held a big event. My brother kind of orchestrated bringing over 70 members of our birth family and our adoptive family together to meet each other for the first time.
That's so great.
So my mothers got to meet each other, and my sisters and my aunties, and so it was a really powerful event. And next week I'll be with my cousin, going to visit him from my birth family side. So
that's so nice.
Yeah, so it's very important.
Yes.
And when parents do talk about it, and recognize the kids' backgrounds, etc., it's not like the children never think about it. It's just they're wondering if it's okay to talk about it.
Yes.
And so when we lead in that discussion, we actually give the kids permission to talk about it.
Yes.
And that it's okay to talk about it. And to talk about it in positive terms, and not talk negatively about the birth family, because then we're talking negatively about them as well. So all these things, it can be complicated, but yeah, you can have kids who are really 2 years old. I know same little girl who 2 years old, hi, I'm adopted, my parents are white, and so she was just from that age all the way up. And then you have others who are really, don't talk about it very much, but everybody has that need and desire, whether you're adopted or not, to know where you come from and who are your people. So
yes.
Really important.
Yes, and like I said, knowing where you're from define where you're going.
Yeah.
And what you all telling me is that the kids sometimes may, like the loyalty issues, they may want to know inside, but they don't want to offend their mom or their dad. That's why they don't want to ever bring it up. But if the parent brings it up, then it helps them to open up, to let you know how they feel about it, and to say, I really want to, yes, I want to meet my both parents, or I don't want to have anything to do with them. Then now you know where they're standing up to be able to support them in any case.
Yes.
That's very important. Yeah, I think we are at the end of the discussion. Just quickly, what do you want to tell anybody or any young couple who wants to do cultural adoption?
Be intentional from the very beginning, from pre-adoptive process. Just really be intentional about where you're adopting from. For a transcultural, transracial adoption, ahead of time, find connections. Talk to your adoption agency, and they can probably connect you with other adoptive families who have adopted from that country, who have adopted transracially. Talk to them about their experience. Go to workshops, find a support group before you adopt, because when you adopt, you're also a parent maybe for the first time, or you have a new addition and you're overwhelmed just with that. That'd be my first thing. And just know, walking into a transracial, transcultural adoption, be ready to be uncomfortable, to be ready to step outside of your comfort zone, to be ready to talk about hard issues. Race, racial identity, racism, it will become a part of your normal family
Life.
discussions in your life, and it should be. And you need to be ready to create a space where your child feels safe talking about those issues. And if you aren't comfortable with that, then maybe it's not for you. And that old, that saying, love is enough, and it's not. So love is the foundation, love in a family. But I am not Senegalese, and I am not black, and so I will actually never be able to provide enough of what Calvin needs. And so that's why I have to seek it from other sources, from Senegalese people, from African American people, from other mentors, and know going into this that you will always have that. Well, as mamas, I think we always feel that we're never enough on so many levels, but you really feel it, and you really feel like you'll never be able to truly give your son or daughter what they've lost. My son is no longer in Senegal, so it was my choice to take him from his culture. I have to make sure that I'm giving him that as much as possible. And as a Caucasian woman, I really can learn as much as I can, but I really don't know what his experience is as a black male. And so I need to find people who do know that and who can speak to him about that and help him through that. So, yeah.
Well, you are doing a great job, and I mean, you give your all, and that's all what you can do.
Yes.
And I'm sure he appreciates it. Thank you, Jessica. Katie?
I would like to just say ditto. I love that it be intentional. That's great advice. And yes, knowing that you are never gonna be able to provide everything for your child when it's a transcultural adoption. I would say the hardest day for me when it came to the whole adoption process was the day we left Ethiopia with him, because I knew that was the last day that he would be like fully immersed in his culture. And I just remember, I didn't think it would affect me that much, but going onto that plane and like leaving the country with him was just more heartbreaking than I ever thought. And that is kind of where that whole evolution of learning, like, I'm not going to be able to provide everything for him. And being able to find those groups. There are so many groups out there that are available, and so many places that you can just and ask questions. And I'm definitely the person that it makes really awkward conversations most of the time. I'll just be like asking questions and trying to explain to my son that that's okay, that if you need to learn more, you can always learn more, and we will find ways. So it's a bigger educational experience than I ever thought, but it is an amazing experience as well. So,
Wow, you guys are great moms, and I'm proud of you and all these sacrifices that you're doing for your kids. Robert, I have a question that was sent for you.
Yeah.
She said, I am curious what Robert thinks about transcultural adoption, transracial adoption. What do you think of it?
Yeah, so I think all things considered, it's best for kids to be able to remain in their families and to address those circumstances. And so that's where I start. And when I look at transracial, international adoptions, etc., I look at it through my own lens, but also I see it oftentimes as a social justice issue, whereby families of color need to have at least the same access to be able to, an opportunity to adopt children of color. And in our society, that's not the case. So I do see it as kind of a social justice issue. And then I see it as, hey, you know what? These are kids who also need homes. And so, let's support the parents so that we can support the children so that they have permanency. So it's kind of a layered, nuanced response, but that is, I think that's the reality. And I think we need to address the issues that kind of bring so many kids into the system. So we have racial disparities in every nation. I mean, every state here in America, disproportionate termination of parental rights and child protection involvement. because of oftentimes bias and because of poverty-related issues. And so those are issues. And so I think we need to support communities, orphanages, and help them to also foster their own kids and support them. And when necessary, then yes, support the transracial international adoptions and the families. And address kind of making sure that we're not doing too much of a consumer mentality involved in it, whereby, you know, we heard some time ago about children being sent back to like Russia, and because damaged goods or those kinds of things. So it's really important that we're looking at meeting both the needs of the parents as well as the kids' needs. And I think both these parents have done a commendable job and are attending to what needs to be attended to. It's really saying, hey, let's look at the circumstances which result in so many kids and so many parents having to relinquish their children, because that's a loss that, you know, is very, very difficult to repair.
Yes.
So,
yes.
But ending on a good note, though, saying, hey, it's a beautiful thing when it works out well.
Yes.
And you do have to be intentional, and sometimes even what I refer to as counterintuitive parenting, where you'll do some things that you wouldn't do if you were parenting a white child. And it's okay to recognize that and to accept that our families are different than same-race families, and so that we can go ahead and meet those specific needs.
Yeah, and one last question that some friends asked also was that, okay, I think we are running out of time, but it was just like briefly, why is that you don't see black women or black parents adopting white kids?
Yes, because of racism.
That's a short answer. So, that's a short answer.
It does happen.
Yep.
It happens here, and I've met families, but it's not the same experience.
Yeah.
And there is a history of racism in that practice. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you all. It was a pleasure to have you all, and I really appreciate this discussion, and I'm sure all the viewers did appreciate it too. And people, please continue to share if you feel like this forum can help somebody or can be educational. You can share it on your pages, and we'll be on YouTube and on Facebook. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, put them in the comments box. We will be able to answer those questions. I'll send them to Robert or one of these ladies. Thank you so much, Jessica, Robert, and Katie. It was a pleasure having you all, and each one of you is going to go home this month. Bari Butter, Bolos Bari Butter. Go to my Facebook, Bolos Bari Butter, or Instagram to order yours for the winter. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Don't forget to vote, and don't forget to wear your mask and wash hands. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Abdi Heibe. I am a social worker. So please join us on November 3rd to vote for the candidate who is supported by the Service Employee International Union. To find out information about where to vote from home, please go to vote.seiumn.org.
Nouveau à Minneapolis, Tempo Afrique Travel. Vous voulez voyager? Achetez vos billets d'avion à l'agent de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel. Avec l'agent de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel, pas de problème de connexion, pas de problème de transfert de vol. Avec l'agent de voyage Tempo Afrique Travel, c'est le voyage en toute tranquillité, en toute beauté, de votre maison jusqu'à votre destination. Votre satisfaction est notre plaisir.